She stood behind the velvet curtain, hands trembling, heart racing. The music from the lounge outside pulsed through the walls like the countdown to her dignity being auctioned off. Emily wasn't supposed to be here. Not like this. Not wearing this red satin dress that clung to her body, not with dark lipstick she'd never dared to try before, not with a stranger whispering in her ear, telling her how much her purity was worth. "You're the highlight of the night," the manager said, smiling like a salesman at a car auction. "Fresh. Untouched. The clients will fight for you." Emily's lips parted, but no sound came out. Her body was here, but her mind was back in that small hospital room with flickering fluorescent lights. Her mother had coughed all night, each wheeze sounding more final than the last. The doctors had offered hope if only they had the money. $270,000. That was the price of her mother's life. That was the price her family couldn't pay. Her aunt had said she found a solution. A high-end job. Elegant, respectable. Just for a few months. Just enough to help. Emily remembered signing the contract. It had fancy words, complicated clauses, and her aunt's voice echoing behind her. "Don't worry. It's only hospitality. You'll serve drinks, greet VIP guests. You're pretty enough for it, Emily." No one mentioned a club. No one said anything about a stage. Or a spotlight. Now she stood there, heart-shattering, waiting to be presented. She wasn't ready. She had always believed in goodness. In people. In second chances. But this was betrayal. It wasn't the world that sold her. It was someone she trusted. "Time to shine," the manager whispered, pushing the curtain aside. The light hit her like fire. A sea of faces turned. Men in suits, laughter, glasses clinking, and then silence. She stepped forward, blinded, terrified, but she walked anyway. Because what choice did she have? Then, in the far back of the room, a man rose from his seat. Tall, dressed in black. No drink in hand. No smirk on his face. Just two cold eyes watching her like he saw everything. Not just her body, but her fear, her shame, her soul. The room buzzed again. Numbers were thrown. Offers made. One man raised a card with a number that made the others go quiet. But it wasn't him who caught her attention. It was the man in the shadows. He didn't bid. He didn't blink. He simply said to no one in particular, "I'll take her." The room turned. The manager hesitated. "She's not up for immediate sale. Tonight's..." The man pulled out a card, black, embossed. He handed it to the assistant. A name was whispered, and just like that, the manager stepped aside. Emily didn't understand what was happening, only that everything shifted. One moment, she was being sold. The next, she was being taken. As the man approached her, she didn't know whether to run or collapse. But he stopped at a distance, looked her in the eyes, and said something she would never forget. "You have no idea who I am, but tonight, I just stopped you from being broken. You don't owe me thanks. You owe yourself a new beginning." And with that, he turned and walked away. Emily stood frozen, the lights fading. The crowd confused, and her heart torn between terror and something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Emily Walker had always been the kind of girl who saw beauty in quiet things. She found comfort in books with worn pages, in the warmth of sunlight on library floors, in the way her mother used to hum softly while stirring tea. Her world had once been simple, soft, filled with dreams of becoming a nurse and taking care of others the way her mother had once cared for her father. But life had different plans. After her father passed from a sudden stroke when she was 16, everything began to crumble. Her mother tried her best to hold the family together, taking shifts at the local diner and giving Emily all the encouragement she could manage between migraines and mounting bills. Emily, grateful and determined, promised herself she would study hard, get into nursing school, and one day pay her mother back for every sacrifice. That dream led her to a scholarship in New York. For a while, things felt possible again. Until her mother collapsed at work. The diagnosis was brutal, an advanced neurological disorder that required immediate treatment. The insurance was limited. The bills climbed faster than Emily could breathe. That's when her aunt showed up again, after years of silence. Glamorous, sharp, and distant Aunt Vivian had always been the family's untouchable shadow, the one who left town with a rich man and never looked back. She showed up at the hospital with flowers and a promise. She knew people. She had connections. There was a position in an exclusive hospitality group, high-end, perfectly legal, extremely well-paid. Emily hesitated, but the way her mother clutched her hand, whispering that everything would be okay, pushed her over the edge. One signature. That's all it took. Vivian even handled the paperwork. Emily was told to pack light, be discreet, and not ask questions. The car that picked her up was sleek. The hotel where they housed her before the orientation was luxurious. It wasn't until the black SUV took her to Club Rose that she realized this was never hospitality. It was a transaction. Behind the velvet walls and polished marble floors, women were trained, packaged, presented. Some were there by choice. Most were not. Club Rose wasn't a typical gentleman's club. It was elite, invitation only, hidden behind layers of shell companies and legal loopholes. The girls weren't advertised, they were discovered. The clients didn't book, they bid. Emily had tried to resist, told them she wouldn't participate, but Vivian had made sure her contract was ironclad. She either performed or paid back every cent, including the medical bills now tied to the deal. Every day felt like walking through smoke, suffocating and surreal. She'd been in the club for 6 days before the event. 6 days of whispered threats, forced rehearsals, and hollow reassurances that she could still back out if she paid her way out, which they all knew she couldn't. Then came the night, the red dress, the lights, the strangers, and him. Damian Carter was a man the world whispered about but rarely saw. He didn't do interviews. He didn't date celebrities. He didn't flaunt his wealth the way most billionaires did. He simply existed in the background of powerful rooms, pulling strings no one dared question. Rumors said he bought dying companies and resurrected them like some corporate surgeon. Others said he destroyed things just to watch them fall. But no one knew what truly drove him, what haunted him. That night at Club Rose wasn't his first visit. He'd been watching quietly, waiting for something or someone. When he saw Emily under the spotlight, not posing, but standing like a deer in headlights, fragile but unbroken, something shifted. There was a pain in her posture that mirrored his own. A story her eyes almost screamed, but her lips never told. He saw her, not as a body, but as a mirror. And mirrors, no matter how cracked, never lie. So he stepped in, bought her out, not to possess, not yet, but because he couldn't watch her fall the way someone else once had. Emily didn't know his name that night, but she would. And he didn't know her strength yet, but he would. Because their story hadn't begun at the club. That was only the spark. What came next would be the fire. Emily didn't speak during the entire ride to his estate. She sat stiffly in the back seat of a sleek black car, her eyes locked on the reflection of the man seated beside her. Damian Carter. His name had been whispered by the staff before they rushed to accommodate him. No one had expected him to show up, even less expected him to claim a girl on the first night. He didn't look at her, not once. He stared out the window, jaw clenched, mind somewhere distant. The silence between them stretched thick with questions Emily didn't dare ask. When the car stopped, she followed him through the towering gates of a home that looked like it belonged to another universe. High ceilings, cold marble, minimalist decor. Everything screamed control, power, wealth. He turned to her once they entered the grand hallway. "This is not a club," he said simply. "No one will touch you here. No one will ask anything of you." She blinked, confused, her voice soft and wary. "Then why am I here?" Damien's gaze didn't waver. 30 days. That's how long I'm asking you to stay. You'll have your own room, your privacy. You're not a prisoner. But you'll stay. At the end of 30 days, if you still want to leave, I'll give you a way out. With no debt, no ties. Emily stared at him. "Why me?" His answer was quiet. "Because I recognize something in your eyes, something I used to see in the mirror." And with that, he walked away. The next morning, Emily woke to sunlight pouring into a room larger than her entire apartment back home. There were clothes in the closet untouched, a bookshelf lined with novels she loved, and a breakfast tray waiting by the door. No locked doors, no cameras, no guards. It felt almost like a dream, or worse, a setup. But days passed, and nothing happened. Damien kept his distance. She'd see him sometimes in the study reading, or in the garden walking alone. He never approached her, never asked her to stay near him. It was like living with a ghost who paid attention in silence. Emily began to explore. The mansion was quiet, more like a museum than a home, but the garden behind it was alive. She found herself pulled to it day after day, kneeling in the soil, touching the flowers. She planted something one morning, a single lavender seedling. It made her feel human again. Damien noticed. He would pass by the garden path, pause for a moment, then continue without a word. But sometimes she'd see him watching from the window. One afternoon, rain threatened to fall. She was outside trying to cover the young plants. Suddenly, an umbrella opened above her. She looked up and saw him standing in the rain, holding it steady. "You shouldn't get soaked," he murmured. "They're just flowers," she replied. "But they're yours," he said. That was the first time she smiled. It wasn't much, just a curve of her lips. But it was real. That evening, he invited her to dinner. The table was long, but he sat only a few seats away. Conversation was minimal, but something was different, softer. The tension that once hung between them now hummed with unspoken emotion. "You still haven't asked what I want from you," he said at one point. Emily looked up, her voice steady. "Because I don't think you even know yet." He blinked slowly, then gave the smallest nod. "Maybe you're right." Over the days that followed, something fragile began to form. Emily shared stories about her childhood, about her father teaching her how to ride a bike, about her mother's laugh when she used to burn pancakes. Damien listened. He never interrupted. When he finally spoke about his past, it was with a quiet that made her heart ache. He told her about a woman named Clara, the girl he loved once, how she'd fallen into a world like Club Rose, how he'd been too late. Emily didn't touch his hand, but she looked at him with something deeper than pity, understanding. One evening, as they sat on the balcony overlooking the city lights, he said, "You remind me of her, not in your face, but in your strength." Emily's voice was almost a whisper. "Then don't try to save me, like you failed to save her. Let me save myself." Damien turned to her. "That's why I haven't touched you. I needed to know if I was helping you, or trying to rewrite my own guilt." She didn't speak, but she stayed beside him, and that was louder than any answer. Nights became warmer, dinners longer. Laughter returned slowly like sunlight after a storm. They danced once without music barefoot in the hallway. Just two broken people learning how to move again. Emily never said the word love. Neither did he. But it filled the spaces between them. In how he brought her books she'd once mentioned in passing. In how she left notes by his coffee short and teasing. In how silence no longer felt empty. On the 29th day, he took her to a hidden room she hadn't seen before. Inside was a painting unfinished. A woman in shadows standing in a storm. "It's Clara," he said. "I never finished it." She looked at the canvas, then at him. "Maybe it's not supposed to be her anymore." He met her eyes. "Then who is it? Someone who's still standing," she said. "Someone who deserves to be painted in light." That night, they didn't touch. But he placed a hand on her shoulder before they parted. And she placed hers over his. It wasn't possession. It was permission. A gesture of two people no longer surviving, but starting to live. On the 30th morning, Emily sat quietly at the edge of the garden fingertips, grazing the petals of the lavender plant that had bloomed faster than expected. She felt different. Not just because of the surroundings or the food or the silence, but because for the first time in years, her heartbeat wasn't driven by fear or debt or desperation. It was still, calm, curious. Damien joined her a few minutes later, not saying anything, simply sitting beside her on the stone bench. The quiet stretched not uncomfortable, but full of things neither of them had dared to say. Then he handed her a folded envelope. "Your contract," he said. "It's over. Your debt is cleared. You're free to go." She opened it, reading slowly. No tricks, no conditions, just freedom. She looked up. "That's it?" He nodded once. "That's it." Her throat tightened. She should have been relieved, ecstatic even, but something in her chest ached, as if this freedom carried a price she hadn't expected. That evening, she began packing, unsure whether she was doing it because she truly wanted to leave or because she felt she was supposed to. When she passed the study, she saw Damien seated at the desk, staring at the painting again. He didn't look up. She didn't speak, but a heaviness settled in her chest. That night, she couldn't sleep. Memories replayed behind her eyes, the first night the rain, the umbrella, his voice trembling as he shared what he'd lost, and what he was still trying to find. She rose barefoot and walked the hallways until she found him on the balcony. "Why me?" she asked, voice soft but steady. He didn't answer right away. When he did, it was a whisper. "Because when I looked at you, I saw someone who hadn't been broken yet. Someone who might still believe the world could be kind." Emily stepped closer. And now, Damien's voice faltered. "Now I see someone who taught me to believe that too." She reached for his hand. "Then why does this feel like goodbye?" He exhaled slowly. "Because I promised myself I wouldn't keep you, no matter how much I wanted to." She nodded, a single tear sliding down her cheek. "And if I don't want to go?" His hand tightened slightly in hers. "Then you're free to stay. But not as someone owned. Not because of debt. Not because of guilt. Only if it's your choice." She didn't answer right away, just leaned her head gently against his shoulder, the city lights flickering below like stars. The next morning, Emily made a decision. She didn't unpack. She didn't leave. She dressed simply, walked into the kitchen, and made coffee for two. When Damien entered the room, surprised to see her still there, she simply handed him a mug and said, "Good morning." It became their routine, not planned, not forced, organic. She didn't move back into the guest wing. Instead, she stayed where she'd been. Her room remained hers, his remained his. But their lives slowly intertwined. They started having late-night conversations about books, art memories. He showed her how to sketch. She taught him how to cook pasta the way her mother had done. They existed like two puzzle pieces that didn't force themselves to fit but somehow always found their way into alignment. But beneath that peace, there were questions still unanswered. One afternoon, Emily discovered a hidden drawer in the study filled with letters. Dozens of them unopened, all addressed to Damien, from Clara's parents, from friends, from people trying to reach him after her death. She sat on the floor holding the faded paper, tears burning behind her eyes. When Damien found her there, he didn't get angry. He sat across from her and said, "I couldn't open them because I couldn't face the truth, that I wasn't there when she needed me most." Emily reached for his hand. "Then maybe it's time to stop punishing yourself for something you can no longer change." He looked at her eyes, red. "You think I deserve forgiveness? I think you've already begun to forgive yourself. You just don't know it yet." That night, for the first time, she touched his face gently, brushing away the shadow in his eyes. And for the first time, he didn't flinch. A few weeks later, Emily suggested they visit Clara's grave. Damien hesitated, but agreed. They drove in silence. When they arrived, he stood quietly by the stone, reading her name over and over. Emily knelt beside it, placing a flower. She mattered. "But you matter too," she said softly. He didn't speak, but the way he looked at Emily said more than any words could. Healing isn't loud. It's slow, quiet, reluctant. But it happens. And between them, it was happening. Slowly, but surely. Damien began opening old letters, responding to people he hadn't spoken to in years. He started sleeping again. He smiled more. Emily, in turn, began to write again. Stories, memories. Her journals filled with pages she never thought she'd have the courage to write. She began working part-time at a local women's shelter, helping girls who'd gone through things she barely survived herself. Damien came with her once, quietly observing. He offered to fund a new wing, named it Clara's Light. Emily didn't need to say anything. He already knew what it meant. One night, they sat in the garden watching the stars. She turned to him and said, "When I first came here, I thought I'd lost everything. But I found more than safety. I found peace, and I found you." He looked at her, voice quiet. "I spent years believing love was supposed to be painful, that it had to be earned through suffering. You showed me something else." She reached for his hand. "Love isn't what saves us. It's what we choose to become when we finally believe we deserve to be saved." He didn't kiss her. Not yet. But the silence between them was full, complete. The kind of silence that only exists when two people have stopped surviving and started healing together. The peace they were building was delicate, like fine glass suspended in midair. It shimmered in the sunlight, but even the softest tremor could shatter it. Emily woke one morning to find Damien already gone from the mansion. A note rested on her nightstand, written in his clean handwriting. "Had to take care of something urgent. Back before dinner." She made breakfast, walked in the garden, and even started sketching again. But as the sun dipped low, a strange weight settled in her chest. He never missed dinner. Not once since the day she stayed. By nightfall, her phone buzzed. It was a number she didn't recognize. When she answered, the voice on the other end was cold, sharp, too calm. "Miss Walker, if you ever want to see Mr. Carter again, you'll come alone." Her blood turned to ice. She tried to speak, but the line disconnected. She ran to the study, heart pounding, searching for anything, an address a clue. In a locked drawer, she found a photo of Damien outside Club Rose and a torn page with numbers, scribbles a time. It wasn't random. He had gone back. She remembered the way he stared into that place the night he first saw her. The way his jaw tightened when Clara's name was mentioned. She knew this wasn't just business. This was closure. Or maybe vengeance. Without thinking, she rushed out, called a car, and gave the driver the address she had found weeks ago on a document in Damien's office. An abandoned warehouse near the edge of the city. When she arrived, the air was thick with tension. The windows were boarded, but faint light bled through the cracks. She entered quietly, heart thudding against her ribs. Voices echoed from within. Male voices. Angry. Then she heard his. Calm. Measured. "Damien, you don't get to do this again," he said. "Not to anyone. Not to her." A laugh answered. "You think money can buy you control, Carter? You're too late. You always are." Emily crept forward, peeking through a gap in the wall. Damien stood face to face with a man she recognized from Club Rose, the same manager who had pushed her on stage. His suit was wrinkled, his expression smug. Two other men flanked him, both armed. Damien looked fearless, but she could see the tension in his shoulders, the storm in his eyes. "You trafficked people under the pretense of luxury," Damien said. "You took innocence and turned it into profit. This ends now." The man sneered. "You think threatening me will change anything? You walked away once. You let Clara fall. Are you going to let her replacement fall too?" That's when Emily stepped out. Her voice cut through the room like lightning. "I'm not anyone's replacement." Every eye turned to her. Damien's widened in disbelief. "Emily." She walked slowly, deliberately, placing herself between him and the men. "You're not repeating the past," she said to Damien, "and I'm not letting you carry this alone." The manager laughed again, pulling a weapon from under his coat. But before anything could happen, a rush of footsteps echoed from the back entrance. Police stormed in, weapons drawn. Within seconds, the men were restrained, handcuffed, and silenced. Damien turned to her, slowly, eyes still stunned. "How?" She pulled out her phone. "I made a copy of your investigation notes, just in case. When they called, I sent everything to the police." He stared at her, and for the first time, his expression broke completely. "You came." She nodded, stepping closer. "Because you showed me how to stand. And now, it's my turn to stand for you." They walked out of the warehouse together as sirens blared in the distance. The air outside felt different. Cleansed. Back at the mansion, neither of them spoke for a long time. Emily sat in the living room, curled up on the couch. Damien stood by the window, staring into the dark. Then he said softly, "I thought if I could bring them down, maybe I could forgive myself." She looked at him. "And did it work?" He turned. "It didn't fix everything, but it made me realize that maybe I'm not beyond redemption." She stood, walked to him, and placed a hand on his chest. "You never were. You just needed someone to remind you." That night, they didn't sleep in separate rooms. Not because of passion, but because of peace. Because there was nothing left between them but truth. In the silence, Damien whispered, "I don't want to lose you. But I won't keep you." Emily answered with the simplest truth she had ever known. "Then don't ask me to stay. Just keep walking beside me." In the days that followed, headlines exploded. A high-profile investigation revealed the inner workings of Club Rose and its network. Damien's name appeared not as a suspect, but as a whistleblower. Emily declined interviews. Instead, she continued her work with the shelter, helping more women than ever before. One evening, while sorting books at the center, a girl no older than 16 looked up at her with wide, tired eyes. "Did someone help you?" once she asked. Emily smiled gently. "Yes. But more importantly, someone believed I could help myself." That night, as she returned to the mansion, she found Damien in the garden, tending to the lavender. "I thought I'd keep it alive," he said. "For you." She sat beside him. "It's not just mine anymore." He looked at her, really looked. "Then maybe we should plant something new." And in that moment, beneath the soft evening sky, they did. Not because they needed healing anymore, but because healing had already begun. Not because they were escaping pain, but because they were finally choosing love, not as a rescue, but as a promise. A promise to grow together. The weeks passed with an unexpected kind of quiet. Not the silence of distance or discomfort, but the kind of quiet that only two people who had fought through fire could understand. Damien and Emily lived in the same space now, not as two souls bound by trauma or guilt, but as two people choosing each other every day in the small things. Morning coffee, shared glances, long walks. The lavender bloomed stronger than ever, and Emily added new flowers beside it. Sunflowers for strength, daisies for innocence. Damien surprised her by building a small greenhouse next to the garden. It wasn't grand, but it was enough. Enough to grow, enough to begin again. But healing isn't a straight line. Sometimes it curves, dips, and tests the heart in places you thought were already mended. One late afternoon, Emily received a letter in the mail with no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a photo of her mother, a hospital logo, and a date. She froze. That hospital had gone bankrupt months ago. The records were supposed to be sealed. The signature at the bottom was faint, but familiar. Her aunt. Emily sat on the porch for a long time, holding the paper like it weighed the world. She knew she should tell Damien, but some part of her, a part that still carried old wounds, wondered if this would change how he saw her. She had never told him the full truth. Not just about how she ended up at Club Rose, but about the lies she once told herself to survive. That night, she barely ate. Damien noticed, of course. "You're quieter than usual," he said gently as they sat in the living room. Emily hesitated, then spoke. "I think my aunt forged the hospital bills." "I don't think the debt was real." The silence that followed was louder than anything. Damien didn't react with anger, just confusion. "What do you mean?" She held up the letter. "I don't know why. Maybe she pocketed the money. Maybe she manipulated everything. But I think I was never supposed to be sold. She just needed a reason to convince me to sign that contract." Damien stood slowly, his expression unreadable. He walked to the window, hands in his pockets. "So the night I met you, you were there because of a lie." Emily nodded. "Yes, a lie I believed, a lie I was willing to sacrifice everything for." He turned back to her eyes, softer now. "You don't owe me an apology. You trusted someone. That doesn't make you weak." She took a deep breath. "I feel like I don't even know who I was back then. I gave up everything for a version of the truth that wasn't even real." Damien crossed the room and knelt in front of her, and yet somehow, that same girl found her way here. That girl who walked into hell still came out whole. That girl is the reason I know how to live again. Emily's voice broke. "I'm scared that if you look too closely, you'll see someone you never really chose, just someone you felt guilty for." Damien shook his head. "I didn't fall in love with the girl who needed saving. I fell in love with the woman who saved herself." She wrapped her arms around him, and they stayed like that for what felt like hours. But the emotional twist wasn't over. Days later, as the investigation into Club Rose expanded, Emily was called to testify not just about her own experience, but to help protect the other girls. She didn't hesitate. Damien supported her, driving her to the courthouse and waiting in the hallway the entire time. Inside, she stood tall, telling her story without trembling. She spoke not as a victim, but as a survivor. Her words moved the jury, the attorneys, even the press outside. That evening, as they walked to the car, a reporter called out. "Miss Walker, are you and Mr. Carter together?" Emily paused, looked at Damien, and for the first time answered publicly, "Yes." But not because of what happened, because of what we became after. That night, a storm rolled in. The rain pounded the windows, wind howled through the trees, but inside the mansion, everything remained still. They lay in bed, neither of them sleeping, just breathing in rhythm. Emily turned toward him, eyes searching. "Do you ever wonder if we would have found each other without all the pain?" Damien smiled faintly. "No, because I think it was the pain that made us ready for each other." She brushed a hand across his chest. "Sometimes I wonder if love is supposed to be this quiet, this calm." He nodded. "It's not about noise. It's about knowing someone is there even in silence." Emily closed her eyes. "Then I think I finally understand it." The next morning, Damien took her somewhere he hadn't shown anyone before. A small lakeside cabin tucked in the woods outside the city. He had bought it years ago, planning to run away from everything, but never had the courage to stay there alone. Now he handed her the key. "I want you to have this. Not as a gift, but as a place. Our place." She walked through the door, the scent of wood and old memories filling her lungs. It was quiet, untouched, full of light. She turned to him. "Let's fix it up together." Over the next few weeks, they painted walls, rebuilt furniture, planted flowers. They laughed. They argued over colors. They shared meals on the floor with paint on their clothes. It wasn't a mansion. It wasn't guarded by gates or filled with expensive things, but it was theirs. One night, as they sat outside watching fireflies, Emily whispered, "I thought I would never trust anyone again. But you made it safe to try." Damien pulled her close. "And you made it safe to hope again." She looked up at the stars. Maybe that's what love really is. Not fireworks, not saving, just choosing. Every day. Even when it's hard. He nodded, his voice low. "Then I choose you. Today. Tomorrow. Every day after." She smiled through tears. "I choose you too." The twist wasn't tragedy. It wasn't betrayal. It was the realization that love doesn't always arrive the way we expect. Sometimes it comes dressed as rescue, but becomes partnership. Sometimes it looks like silence, but speaks louder than any vow. And sometimes it grows not from perfection, but from everything we survived before we met each other. In the quiet of the cabin, with the scent of earth and home and forgiveness all around them, they didn't need to say anything more. They had already said everything that mattered. 1 year later, the cabin had become more than just a retreat. It had become a life. The walls, once blank, were now filled with soft paintings, hand-drawn quotes, and pictures that captured stolen smiles and quiet mornings. The small garden out front bloomed wild and free, much like the two people who tended to it. Emily had launched a new initiative in partnership with the shelter called Second Light. It wasn't just a program. It was a promise to offer not only protection, but purpose to women who had lost everything. Damien funded it quietly, never wanting the credit, always standing behind her, not in front. He still worked, but he no longer chased power. His days were split between supporting her cause and painting again. Real painting. Colorful, messy, sometimes unfinished, but always honest. He had finally finished the portrait he once began for Clara. But it no longer depicted a woman in shadows. Instead, it showed a figure standing tall, surrounded by light with lavender in her hands, and a second figure reaching gently toward her. The gallery that exhibited it didn't need a nameplate. Everyone who knew their story recognized it instantly. On the anniversary of their first meeting, they returned to Club Rose. Not to the club itself, which had been shut down and repurposed as a rehabilitation center, but to the street outside it. They stood in silence for a long time. Then Emily said, "I used to think this was the place my life ended." Damien replied softly, "But it was only where your real story began." They placed a single flower on the sidewalk, then walked away, hand in hand. That evening, back at the cabin, a small group of girls from the shelter arrived for a celebration. Laughter echoed through the trees. Lights strung across the trees glowed warm against the night sky. Emily stood beneath them and gave a small speech. "I used to believe that love was a rescue mission, that someone would come and pull me out. But I was wrong. Love isn't the hand that drags you to safety. It's the one that waits patiently, offering a place to rest when you're ready to walk out on your own." Her voice didn't shake. Her eyes didn't hide. She stood tall, Damien beside her, and for the first time, she felt the full weight of peace settle in her chest. Later that night, as the stars returned and the fireflies danced around the garden, Emily and Damien sat on the porch, wrapped in a shared blanket. She looked at him and whispered, "If someone told me years ago that I would find love in the middle of my worst moment, I would have laughed." Damien smiled. "And if someone told me the girl I saved would be the one to save me, I wouldn't have believed it either." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "We're not broken people anymore." He kissed her forehead gently. "No, we're just people who kept choosing love, even when it was hard." They sat there for hours, not speaking, not needing to. The world had changed around them. The noise, the pain, the doubt, it all faded. And in its place, there was only this: a garden full of life, a home full of quiet joy, and a love that wasn't born from saving or owing, but from healing, from choosing, from knowing that sometimes the most beautiful beginnings come from the darkest places. Because when two hearts find each other, not to complete one another, but to walk together whole, love stops being an escape and becomes a destination. Their love was not perfect, but it was real. And that made it enough. Always.